What if everything you thought you knew about the story of Jesus was incomplete? What if Christ's journey hid a forgotten dimension, a silent link with a lineage of enlightened beings who walked the earth long before him? Imagine for a moment that behind the public figure of Jesus, there was a long and sacred preparation, guided by masters as old as time itself, known only to those who dared to search beyond the surface. In each generation, they were few, yet powerful, guardians of the light, and according to some hidden traditions, this order would have prepared the ground for the birth of a new archetype of consciousness, the awakened Christ. But who were these masters? Why has their name never appeared in the official Gospels? And the most provocative of all, why would Jesus, a being of such spiritual magnitude, need to be initiated by someone? The answer to this question can overturn not only the common understanding of Christ, but also the way we understand the process of spiritual awakening. This is an invitation for those who want more than doctrine, for those who yearn for revelation. Many have heard of the three wise men, mysterious men from the East who, according to biblical accounts, followed a star to the birthplace of Jesus. What is rarely discussed is, who were they really? Why does the Bible call them magi and not kings? This word, in the original Greek magoi, refers to initiates of the ancient Zoroastrian school of Persia, masters knowledgeable in astrology, alchemy, and spiritual sciences. Could their visit not just be a symbolic one, but rather the recognition of a new initiate by a much older order? The Order of the Seven Masters emerges in this scenario as a missing piece in humanity's great spiritual puzzle. Passed down orally in various cultures, it is said to have been formed by 7 elevated consciousnesses, representatives of universal archetypes of human evolution. Their names have changed over time. In some traditions they are called Elohim, in others avatars, and in still others the 7 rays. But their mission was always the same: to uphold the light on earth and prepare the way for great moments of planetary transition. And according to esoteric records, they knew of Christ's coming long before his birth. The connection between Christ and this order is not accepted by traditional religious paths. But behind the scenes of ancient spirituality, there are texts that suggest he was not only guided by this lineage, but was the apex of a carefully orchestrated plan by these beings. A plan that had been unfolding since Atlantis, passing through initiatory Egypt, the mystery schools of Persia and India, and would find in Jesus its purest manifestation. It is at this point that many begin to wonder, why are there so many gaps in Christ's biography? From his 12th to his 30th year, we simply know nothing. For such a central figure in the history of mankind, this silence is deafening. What was he doing during these 18 years? Could this be the period when he received instruction from the masters, away from the crowds, in the hidden mountains and temples of the world? The journey of an enlightened one almost never begins in public. The glow is only visible after many dark nights of the soul. Jesus' preparation may have been as rigorous as that of the ancient masters who preceded him. He would have been guided through internal trials, visions, intense purifications, and encounters with beings not limited to the physical plane. All of this, according to certain Gnostic and occultist currents, as part of a training to fully awaken his divine spark, what we would call the inner Christ. More than a title, Christ was a state of consciousness, a field of presence that could only be accessed by those who completed the initiatory journey. And this journey was, according to ancient mystical accounts, guarded precisely by the Order of the Seven Masters. Each one of them would represent a level of soul evolution, a step of awakening, and together they would form an invisible school, not of stone temples, but of internal revelations. What we are proposing here is not a denial of what is already known, but rather an expansion. Jesus remains the magnificent being who touched hearts with love and wisdom. The question is, was he part of something even greater? Could he have been the pinnacle of a secret lineage of avatars preparing humanity for a collective spiritual leap? This perspective does not diminish the grandeur of Christ. It amplifies it. It shows that the awakening he experienced could be available to each and every one of us, as long as we follow the same path of courage, surrender, and transformation. The Order of the Seven Masters would then be the hidden map, the subtle trail that crosses the ages and awakens those ready to become more than just believers, to become living Christ-like consciousnesses in this world. The mystery is not just about who Jesus was. It's about who we can be when we access the same truths that he accessed. When we understand that behind the historical figure, there was a soul that was rising, step by step, guided by beings who had already walked this same path. This is what makes his story not just a miracle, but a call, a profound invitation to those who feel, even without words, that there is something much greater behind the surface. Long before Jesus of Nazareth walked upon the earth, there were those who already announced his coming, not as common prophets, but as architects of the awakening of human consciousness. They did not wear priestly robes, nor did they seek public recognition. They acted silently, serving as living bridges between heaven and the world, keeping the flame of divine wisdom lit for millennia. They were called the Enlightened Ones, the Ancients, the Torchbearers. According to various esoteric traditions, they formed an unbroken lineage of masters who preserved the hidden truths about human beings, the universe, and the purpose of existence. This lineage was known by different names in distinct cultures, but its essence remained the same. In ancient Egypt, they were the sons of Thoth, holders of the keys to alchemy and time. In Vedic India, they appeared as rishis, wise men who heard the cosmic chants and translated the harmony of the universe into mantras. In Tibet, they were the Mahatmas, beings who walked between worlds, silently guiding sincere seekers. In Mesopotamia, they were connected to the Enki and the lineage of the Apkallu, wise men who instructed kings with sacred codes. In all these cultures, the narrative was clear. The supreme spiritual knowledge was guarded by an invisible elite of masters. But who were these beings after all? Were they human? Were they celestial? Or were they somewhere in between the two? Some currents describe them as incarnated avatars, others as consciousnesses already freed from the wheel of reincarnation, who chose to remain among humans to keep the path of awakening alive. Everyone agrees on one point. These masters not only knew the truth, they were the truth in motion. And that's why they didn't leave dogmas but seeds. They didn't build stone temples but encoded their wisdom in symbols, myths, and archetypes. The Order of the Seven Masters would have been the most refined manifestation of this lineage. It was not a formal organization with offices and visible hierarchies, but a vibrational field, a subtle alliance between elevated consciousnesses, distributed in different parts of the world, acting as living transmitters of divine intelligence. Each master of the order would represent an aspect of the spiritual totality of the human being, the master of wisdom, of love, of will, of harmony, of science, of devotion, and of transmutation. 7 rays, 7 forces, 7 paths to the same center. In the mystery schools of Egypt, these principles were already taught in a veiled manner. The initiates spent years in silence, observation, and purification before even being exposed to a fraction of higher knowledge. They learned that the universe was governed by invisible laws, and that humans, by aligning themselves with these laws, could transcend their common condition and manifest the divine spark within. These teachings were not merely intellectual, they were transformative. They demanded the death of the ego, the rebirth of the soul, and the courage to pierce the veils of illusion. It's against this backdrop that the birth of Jesus begins to take on new contours. The apocryphal Gospels, texts that were left out of the official selection made by the Church, speak of a boy who already displayed unusual wisdom. And later, during his youth, there are hidden records that point to his passage through initiation centers directly connected to the lineage of these masters. Especially in Egypt and India, places that have always been the cradle of such knowledge. India, for example, held in its Vedas, Upanishads, and in the teachings of yoga, universal truths that deeply echo in the words that Jesus would later utter. The kingdom of God is within you. This phrase, so central to his message, was the heart of Vedanta, the realization of the supreme being within each soul. In turn, the Egyptians spoke of Osiris as one who died and was reborn, symbolizing the transition of the human soul to its divine state. Concepts of death and resurrection were already engraved in the spiritual unconscious of the ancient world, and Jesus lived them fully. It's important to understand that these masters were not seeking to create religions. On the contrary, they taught that all religions were merely fragmented reflections of an unbroken truth. What mattered was not the name of the belief, but the state of consciousness it provided. And that's why, over the centuries, many of them were persecuted, their works burned, their words distorted. Because true knowledge liberates, and every power structure fears this freedom. The lineage of the enlightened, therefore, did not disappear over time. It simply retreated. When the world was no longer ready to listen, they remained silent, waiting for the appropriate cycle to return to touch hearts. And Jesus was the sign of this new cycle. A call that spanned ages, announced by these masters as the moment of incarnation of pure love, of living wisdom, of the embodied example of what a human being can become when reconnecting with their eternal essence. This is the great truth that pulses behind the veil of history. Jesus did not emerge from nothing. He was part of a much larger plan, conceived by millennial consciousness, supported by an invisible network of love and light that crossed millennia, preparing the ground of the collective soul. When we recognize this, we stop seeing Jesus as an isolated being and start seeing him as the culmination of an upward spiral of consciousness. And even more, as a reflection of everything we can be when we rediscover the path left by these masters. The question then ceases to be, who were these masters? And becomes, how can we rediscover them within us? Because every aspect of the order still lives today, in the form of a principle. And the journey of self-discovery is precisely the reunion with each of these principles, activating within us the 7 flames of inner transformation. For centuries, scholars, mystics, and seekers have wondered, what happened to Jesus between the ages of 12 and 30? How is it possible that the canonical Gospels, responsible for shaping the faith of billions, simply remained silent about 18 whole years of the life of the one who would be called the Savior of the world? The absence of information during this period is not just a historical detail. It's a gap that opens doors to the most fascinating revelations of hidden spirituality. Many think of Jesus as someone who, miraculously, simply woke up one day with all the wisdom he carried. But everything in nature goes through stages, including the divine when it incarnates in matter. What various initiatory traditions suggest is that these years of silence were, in fact, the most active years of Christ's life, but in another dimension of reality, the dimension of secret learning, profound initiation, contact with hidden masters, and the polishing of his consciousness. Accounts not recognized by religious orthodoxy, but preserved by esoteric lineages and apocryphal documents, indicate that Jesus would have traveled extensively during this period. The first stop would be Egypt, the cradle of the mystery schools and the guardian of knowledge left by the Atlanteans. It was in Egypt that, according to records such as the Gospel of the 12 Saints, the young Jesus would have studied with the descendants of the Essenes and with the remnants of the priests of Isis and Thoth, being prepared in the mysteries of resurrection and spiritual ascension. Later, there are strong indications that he may have headed east. In India, records preserved by Himalayan monks and mentioned by scholars such as Nicholas Notovich speak of a sage named Isa, who preached among the Brahmins, questioned castes, and brought messages of love and compassion that perfectly echoed the teachings he would later proclaim in Galilee. This Isa would be Jesus, according to these hidden documents, who spent years among the yogis learning about meditation, karma, and unity with the all. This is not about a Jesus fragmented into pieces of various religions, but about a being who sought the truth wherever it revealed itself. The truth does not belong to a temple, a scripture, or a culture. It is universal, and Jesus knew this. Therefore, his journey also led him to Tibet, where he supposedly learned the secrets of the deep mind and the paths of ego dissolution, teachings that would later echo in his words about dying to oneself and being reborn in the spirit. These initiatory passages are not present in the official Gospels because they would have been suppressed by the ecclesiastical councils seeking to shape a narrative that maintained control over popular spirituality. A human Christ, a seeker who went through doubts, trials, and learning from masters of other cultures, would be a risk to institutions, because this Christ would not only be admired, he would be imitated. And someone who follows the same path as Christ becomes free. And spiritual freedom has always been the greatest fear of those who feed on others' ignorance. During these journeys, Jesus would have undergone a series of initiations. In the Egyptian temples, he would symbolically descend into the lower worlds of the psyche, confronting his own fears and shadows. In the ashrams of India, he would immerse himself in the absolute silence of consciousness, dissolving the boundaries between the self and the whole. In Tibet, he would learn about the impermanence of matter and the illusory nature of the ego. Each stage of this journey was like a step towards his final awakening. Not an awakening that would come from outside, but the blossoming of something that was already planted within him. The masters of the Order of the Seven were overseeing all of this, not in the literal sense of physically following his steps, but energetically, guiding his soul through increasingly deeper layers of truth. In dreams, visions, and expanded states of consciousness, Jesus would have received guidance from these beings, who showed him the mysteries of time, incarnation, and the purpose of existence. It was as if his life was being carefully prepared so that he would become a mirror of awakened humanity. And there are signs of this in his later words. When he said, "Whoever wants to come after me, deny himself, take up his cross and follow me," Jesus was not just talking about suffering. He was describing the initiatory process that he himself went through. To deny oneself is to renounce the illusion of the ego. To take up the cross is to accept the soul's journey. And to follow Christ is to tread the same path of enlightenment that he silently undertook, behind the scenes of the world. The silence of the Gospels about these years is not an accidental silence. It is an imposed silence, a silence that holds immense power. Because within this silence lies the key that reveals to us that Christ was human like us, and that his divinity was achieved step by step, not given automatically. This completely transforms our relationship with him. Instead of an unreachable being, he becomes a journeying brother, a living example of what we can be when we embrace the call of the soul. Every place he passed through left marks on his consciousness, and these marks later unified in his public mission. The wisdom of India, the depth of Tibet, the spiritual science of Egypt, the purity of the Essenes. All of this merged into a single message: we are all one with the Father. This was not just a beautiful phrase. It was the expression of a truth that he had lived, felt, and experienced in every cell of his being. Thus, when he emerges at 30 years old saying, "The Spirit of the Lord is upon me," he is not referring to a sudden miracle. He is acknowledging that the inner work has been done, that the initiation has been fulfilled, that the vessel was ready to overflow with the wine of wisdom. It is at this moment that Jesus ceases to be just a man and becomes the Christ, not by divine decree, but by inner conquest. And this conquest is what makes his story so powerful, because it points to a possibility within each of us. There are truths that traverse the centuries like underground rivers, invisible to most, yet uninterrupted. They flow behind religions, myths, and doctrines, silently supporting the evolution of human consciousness. The seven masters are the guardians of these truths. Each one of them represents an aspect of cosmic wisdom, and their teachings were not left in books or temples, but encoded in the soul of the world, waiting for sincere seekers to rediscover them. It's no coincidence that Jesus' message echoes the exact principles of this ancient order, as if his mission was not only individual, but the living manifestation of a far older current. These 7 principles, or rays as they are called in some esoteric traditions, are not just abstract ideas. They are real forces, vibrational patterns that shape the journey of the incarnated spirit. Each master embodies one of these rays and transmits an essential lesson to the awakening of the soul. The first is that of divine will, the force that breaks through the boundaries of the conditioned mind and leads to action aligned with the higher purpose. The second is that of illuminated wisdom, the ability to see beyond duality and recognize the truth wherever it reveals itself. The third ray is that of unconditional love, the quintessential Christ energy, which dissolves barriers and unifies opposites. The fourth is that of harmony and beauty, the integration of internal conflicts for the emergence of a higher new order. The fifth is that of science and spiritual knowledge, the mastery of the invisible laws that govern the universe and the soul. The sixth is that of devotion, the surrender of the ego to the divine, the recognition of human insignificance in the face of cosmic greatness. And the seventh, that of transmutation, the alchemy of consciousness, the transformation of density into light. Each of these principles is present in the words and actions of Jesus, as if he were the channel through which these rays converged to touch humanity. When he says, "I and the Father are one," he manifests the first ray. When he heals with a word or a touch, he manifests the third. When he speaks in parables, revealing profound truths through simple images, he manifests the second. When he forgives his tormentors on the cross, he manifests the sixth. Everything in his trajectory is a living mirror of these ancestral teachings. The most surprising thing is to realize how these same principles are present in other spiritual traditions, which confirms their universal nature. The Vedas speak of the union between Purusha and Prakriti, the spirit and matter, as the path to liberation. Buddhism teaches the middle way, the transmutation of suffering through consciousness. The Kabbalah reveals the 10 Sephirot, expressions of the divine that mirror the same attributes of the 7 masters. What changes is the language. The content is eternal. And Jesus positions himself as the living bridge between these wisdoms. For centuries, these teachings were passed on in a hidden manner, from master to disciple, in silent chambers and prepared hearts. But Jesus breaks this logic. He makes public what was once restricted. He speaks to the people, walks among fishermen, heals the sick, and touches the outcasts. This was not just a compassionate choice, it was strategic. The time had come. Humanity was ready to receive, even if symbolically, the fundamentals of the initiatory path. That's why his speeches were parables, symbolic keys capable of activating spiritual memory in those who had eyes to see and ears to hear. The Beatitudes, for example, are not just poetic statements. They are alchemical formulas for elevating consciousness. Blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Here lies the principle of devotion and surrender. Blessed are the peacemakers, for they will be called children of God. Here is the ray of harmony. Blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness, for they will be filled. Behold the principle of divine will in action. Each phrase carries a code, a frequency, an invitation to expansion. Even the healings of Jesus were not merely physical, they were processes of vibrational realignment. When he said, "Your faith has healed you," he was pointing to the power of consciousness to transcend the limitations of the body. Faith in this context is not blind belief, but a direct connection with the source. This is one of the pillars of the teachings of the order. The human being is not a miserable sinner trying to please a distant God. He is an expression of divinity itself in the process of remembering. And faith is the bridge between forgetting and recognition. Another essential point is non-resistance to evil, taught by Jesus as a form of transcendence. Love your enemies, he said, not as a moral advice but as a profound energetic teaching. Resisting evil strengthens it. Accepting it, understanding it, and redefining it dissolves it. This vision is present in Taoism, Zen, and inner alchemy. The master does not fight against darkness, he becomes light. The seven masters, according to occult traditions, always act in silence. They do not take the stage, do not write treatises, do not found religions. They awaken. They are invisible guides, often present at the moments of greatest soul transformation. Jesus, by manifesting his teachings, became one of them, and at the same time, all of them. His life was a symphony where each ray found expression, and that's why his message still pulses, thousands of years later, in hearts that don't even know why they weep at the sound of his name. It's important to understand that these teachings are not the property of a time or culture. They are open doors inward, and each person who experiences them, even without knowing their names or origins, is actually treading the same path that Christ trod. The path back to the origin, the reconnection with what is eternal within oneself. And the seven masters continue to be present, like invisible lighthouses that guide those who, tired of illusions, finally choose to awaken. For a long time, the name Jesus Christ was treated as if it were a proper name, a personal designation. But the truth that esoteric schools and masters of the initiatory lineage have always upheld is different. Christ is not a surname. Christ is a state of consciousness, a vibrational field of the highest frequency, accessible to every human being who attains a certain degree of inner purification and alignment with the Source. Jesus was the one who embodied this field, but Christ, the cosmic Christ, is eternal, impersonal, and is present in everything that lives. This understanding changes everything. It shifts the figure of Jesus from the position of an external, unattainable deity to that of a supreme mirror of what is possible. And at the same time, it reveals that what he manifested was not something exclusive, but a model, a living code of spiritual activation that exists in every soul. According to Gnostic, Kabbalistic, and Eastern mystical traditions, Christ is the divine spark that dwells within all beings, the seed of the Word, the hidden light that awaits the moment to bloom. In the Gospel of Thomas, one of the most profound apocryphal texts, Jesus says, "If they ask you, where do you come from? Зрение. Мы приходим от света, где свет возник сам по себе." This teaching reveals the Christic origin of the soul. We are not born from dust, but from light. The spark within us was not created. It was emanated as a direct extension of the one consciousness. And it is this spark that the ancient masters sought to awaken in all disciples through initiations, trials, and inner revelations. Christ, therefore, is an inner sun, a light that is not learned, but remembered. The Order of the Seven Masters deeply understood this mystery. They did not seek to form followers, but to activate the inner Christ. Therefore, their teachings were focused on self-realization, not external worship. Jesus, being prepared by this lineage, went through this same process. He not only learned truths, but incorporated them until his body, mind, and soul became transparent channels of light. His mission was to show that it is possible, that every human being can go through the same transmutation, from ignorance to enlightenment, from separation to unity. That's why the cosmic Christ is present not only in Jesus, but in all avatars throughout history. In Krishna, when he declares, "I am the soul residing in all beings." In Buddha, when teaching that there is no self, only the Buddha nature. In Lao Tzu, when he speaks of Tao as the path that cannot be named, but lived. All these masters access the same field. They were all expressions of Christ, albeit under different names. What changes is the cultural attire. The essence remains unchangeable, the realization of unity as the supreme state of being. And how is this spark activated? How do we awaken the Christ within us? The answer is not in a specific ritual, but in a set of internal choices. It starts with listening to the silence, acknowledging our own ignorance, and being willing to die to the ego. The awakening of Christ is preceded by a kind of inner crucifixion, where illusions, attachments, and false identities are exposed and dissolved. It's not a light process, it's intense, often painful, but deeply liberating, because when crossing this portal, what emerges is a completely new being, not reformed, but reborn. Jesus experienced this in a literal sense, but all of us, to some degree, go through the same stages. The dark night of the soul, the temptation in the desert, the surrender in the garden, the invisible cross, and finally the inner resurrection, which is not a return to the flesh, but to the essence. The real miracle was not the body coming back to life, but consciousness surpassing the boundaries of matter. This is Christ, the one who overcame the world, that is, the ego, time, fear, and returned to the origin as pure conscious light. The cosmic Christ is also the organizing intelligence of the universe, the energy that structures galaxies, that pulses within atoms, that vibrates in hearts. It is what physicists call the unified field, what mystics call the Holy Spirit, what poets call eternal love. Everything vibrates in Christ, because Christ is the vibration of the one manifested in diversity, and for this reason, all creation is sacred. Every atom, every leaf, every being carries within itself the memory of the whole. The Order of the Seven Masters teaches that recognizing the Christ within oneself is the first step to recognizing him in others. And this is the most radical secret of Jesus' message. Whatever you did for one of the least of these brothers and sisters of mine, you did for me. Here lies the ultimate revelation. Christ is not only on the altar, but in every glance, in every gesture, in every living being. When we touch someone with love, we touch Christ. When we forgive, we free Christ. When we choose truth over fear, we resurrect Christ within us. This awareness is revolutionary. It demolishes the walls between religions, races, nations, and cultures. Because it shows that we are all children of the same light, temporary manifestations of an eternity that pulses beyond form. And this is what threatens control systems. The truth that Christ is accessible to all, without intermediaries, without temples, without dogmas. All it takes is silence, surrender, and courage. Therefore, we are not here just to admire Jesus. We are here to awaken the Christ, to allow this light to ignite in our actions, words, and daily choices. To be, as he was, channels of presence in the world. Because the new spiritual age will not be marked by external temples, but by hearts inflamed by the Christic light, ordinary men and women living in extraordinary ways. For most people, the word ascension still sounds like a magical or miraculous event, something restricted to sacred and unreachable beings. However, for the oldest spiritual traditions, those preserved in silence by initiatory schools and the Order of the Seven Masters, ascension is not ascending to heaven after death. It's raising consciousness while still alive. It's conquering, step by step, sovereignty over the ego, illusion, time, and separation. And Jesus, by following this path, did not inaugurate a new way. He activated a sacred roadmap already inscribed in the stars of the human soul. According to the tradition of this hidden order, the path of ascension was divided into 7 steps, each representing an essential initiation of the soul. These steps were not merely symbolic. Each corresponded to a real, visceral transformation that completely reorganized the structure of the being. The journey through them required total surrender, profound purification, and an unconditional surrender to the movement of the inner light. It was not a quick or comfortable process. It was a journey of disruption and rebirth, of conscious death and luminous life. And this is exactly the process that Jesus underwent in silence, away from the eyes of the world, until he became the awakened Christ. The first step was breaking the identification with matter. It was when the initiate realized that they were not the body, nor the desires, nor the fears. A moment of crisis where everything that once provided security, status, name, appearance, possession, ceased to make sense. Jesus describes this when he says, "Those who do not renounce all that they have cannot be my disciple." It was not about literal poverty, but about profound detachment. The soul needed to free itself from the prison of form. On the second step came the recognition of the divine spark within oneself. The being had already lost its false identities and now began to realize that there was something eternal, untouched, and sacred pulsating within. Jesus expressed this directly by stating, "The kingdom of God is within you." This recognition was not intellectual. It was lived, felt as absolute truth, as real as breathing itself. The initiate began to live from the center, not the periphery of the being. The third step involved the purification of emotions in the energy field. It was a plunge into the shadows, where everything that had been repressed, anger, jealousy, pride, fear, needed to be confronted and transmuted. It was no longer possible to project one's own conflicts onto others. The initiate had to take full responsibility for everything that emerged from them. Jesus speaks of this when he teaches, "First remove the beam out of your own eye, and then you can see clearly to remove the speck out of your brother's eye." A call to radical honesty. The fourth step was that of reconciliation with the inner feminine, the soul. Here, the initiate turned inward and began to listen to intuition, dreams, subtle signs. Logic gave way to profound wisdom. It is at this point that many found the internal virgin, the receptive, pure, creative aspect of the psyche. Jesus manifests this stage with his sensitivity towards women, his acceptance of the marginalized, his reverence for the feminine as a force of redemption. The fifth step was the activation of the creative word. The being no longer spoke from the ego, but from the spirit. Their words healed, awakened, reorganized the reality around them. Jesus, when healing with a simple rise, or transforming realities with parables, was expressing this power. He was the incarnate Word, and the Word is pure creation. The initiate then became a conscious co-creator, capable of acting on behalf of the source. On the sixth step, the initiate traversed the dark night of the soul. Everything that had been achieved was put to the test. There was a feeling of abandonment, of emptiness, of crossing the inner desert. Jesus experiences this in the Garden of Gethsemane, where he cries out, "Father, take this cup away from me, but let your will be done." The total surrender. The ego, already weakened, needed to die completely. The last resistance disappeared, and the being in tears was reborn in purity. And finally, the seventh step, ascension. Here, the initiate was no longer an I. They became a full channel of Christ consciousness. The separation between creator and creature dissolved. The being lived in unity with everything. Jesus reveals this after his resurrection, when he says, "I ascend to my Father and your Father, my God and your God." He does not place himself above, but alongside. He shows that the same fate awaits everyone who bravely and truthfully tread the path. These 7 steps are not metaphors. They are spiritual realities that come to fruition in the heart of every seeker. And they are energetically upheld by the 7 masters. Each one of them accompanies a step. Each one guides, protects, and instructs the initiate at that stage. In occult traditions, it is said that these masters vibrate on higher planes, but they manifest at crucial moments in a disciple's journey. Not always with words, often with silent presence. But their action is undeniable. They are like the invisible pillars of the great bridge that leads from earth to the inner heavens. The order of the 7 masters does not require external affiliation, rituals, or titles. It demands authenticity, humility, and commitment to one's own awakening. Its call is silent, but unmistakable. And for many, it comes as a whisper in the early dawn, a feeling that there is something more, an impulse to break through the surface of life. When this call is accepted, the journey begins, and the inner Christ begins to awaken, step by step, rung by rung. Jesus, in living through all this, left a model. His life was the sacred manual of ascension, not a series of miracles to admire, but a cosmic roadmap to be followed. His cross was the purification, his resurrection, the victory of light, his ascension, the conscious return to the origin, and most importantly, he never sought exclusivity. He clearly said, "Whoever believes in me will also do the works that I do, and will do them even greater." He was not seeking followers, he was seeking continuers. This is the secret that the Order of the Seven has always guarded, that ascension is possible, that a human can become divine, that earth can become heaven, that each soul, upon awakening to its true path, becomes a potential Christ, not by dogma, but by vibrational merit, not by blind faith, but by authentic transformation. And this is the final call of the lineage, to live not as spectators of the miracle, but as its own living manifestations. If Jesus' teachings were so revolutionary, so powerful and universal, why is almost everything we know about him reduced to a handful of canonical gospels filtered by ecclesiastical councils? Why were the most transformative years of his life simply erased from the records? Why does his contact with Eastern masters, initiatory schools, and ancient traditions not appear in the scriptures that have come down to us? The answer, although uncomfortable, is clear. It was all part of a deliberate erasure. Spiritual truth liberates, and everything that liberates frightens those who live off control. From the beginning, the original teachings of Jesus deeply threatened the power structures, both religious and political. Because he did not teach obedience to dogmas, he taught direct communion with the divine. He did not require mediators, nor temples, nor exclusive priesthood. He spoke of the divine spark within each one, of the equality among the children of God, of the real possibility of living in unity with the whole. And this, for the system, was unacceptable. When the Roman Empire decided to make Christianity its official religion in the 4th century, the motivation was not spiritual, it was political. There was a need to unify the culture of the collapsing empire. But for that to happen, the teachings needed to be shaped, filtered, framed. And that's where the most dramatic process of spiritual censorship in history began. The councils of Nicaea, Constantinople, and others defined what would and would not be considered the Word of God. Entire gospels were discarded. Alternative narratives were labeled as heresy. The deepest mysteries were stifled. Gospels such as those of Thomas, Mary Magdalene, Philip, all with profound Gnostic, symbolic, and spiritually advanced elements, were banned. In them, we find Jesus teaching about the inner Christ, about states of consciousness, about the sacred feminine, and about non-duality. But this was not of interest to a religion that needed centralized authority, hierarchy, and control of the masses. The knowledge was hidden, not because it was false, but because it was too liberating. The Order of the Seven Masters, which is said to have directly influenced the spiritual preparation of Jesus, was erased from history with the same symbolic violence. Any trace of initiatory teachings linked to his journey was forcefully combated. The first Gnostic Christians, who spoke of a universal Christ, were persecuted and labeled as heretics. The Essenes, who prepared the spiritual ground for the coming of Christ, were marginalized. Everything that did not fit into the mold of dogma was buried, both literally and symbolically. And yet, the truth survived. Encoded in symbols, myths, art, sacred architecture, legends, and oral traditions, it survived in the Cathars, who spoke of a secret knowledge left by Christ. It survived in the Templars, who sought the hidden roots of spiritual lineage. It survived in the alchemists, in the Sufi mystics, in the Kabbalists, and in the Hermetic schools that kept the flame of silent wisdom burning. This silence paradoxically became fertile, because everything that was externally repressed began to flourish internally. Humans started to seek within themselves what was denied to them externally, and in this process, millions began to reconnect with the forgotten spark, the one that doesn't need permission to burn. Institutional persecution created the ground for inner awakening, and so it was that Christ, although erased from the official narrative, never disappeared from the heart of humanity. There is an even deeper detail. This erasure was not just historical, it was also psychological. For centuries, we were taught that we were sinners, unworthy, separated from God. That salvation could only come from outside, through external figures. This belief created a wound in the human psyche, a disconnection from our own divine origin. And the erasure of Jesus' spiritual lineage reinforced this idea. The fact that he followed an initiation path that anyone can follow was hidden, and that enlightenment was not a privilege, but a possibility. The Order of the Seven Masters knew that this cycle of concealment would come. Therefore, they prepared in advance ways to preserve knowledge, not only in hidden texts, but in internal practices, in vibrational frequencies, in archetypes. When we look at the seven seals of the Apocalypse, for example, we are facing initiatory symbolism linked to the 7 steps of the path. When we read about the 7 miracles of Jesus in John, we see reflections of the 7 rays of the order. Everything is there, encoded, waiting to be read with awakened eyes. This historical erasure was also necessary in a certain sense. It created the contrast that now allows us to appreciate the rescue. We had to lose the map to learn to listen to the inner compass. And now, in this time when so many souls are awakening, the truth resurfaces, not as a revenge against religion, but as a blossoming of living spirituality. The memory of the inner Christ is being activated, and with it, the remembrance of the order, of the masters, and of the hidden path that never ceased to exist. Today, as we look back at the past with new eyes, we see that the official history was only the surface. Beneath it, a living current of wisdom pulses. The life of Jesus, when understood from an initiatory perspective, reveals much more than miracles and sermons. It reveals a map, a structure, a model of ascension encoded in every gesture, every word, every silence. And the Order of the Seven remains active, not in the corridors of the Vatican, but in the lines between the human heart. Liberation will not come from new institutions, but from the rediscovery of the inner light. And this light is Christ, a Christ beyond the historical figure, beyond theological disputes, beyond men's control, a Christ who lives in every being, ready to pierce through the veil of ignorance and assume their true identity. This is the legacy that history tried to silence, but that the soul never forgot. For millennia, the idea of spiritual masters guiding humanity seemed like a distant myth, a symbolic memory, or an echo of ancient times. But what if I told you they never left? That even amidst the age of noise, materialism, and distraction, the Order of the Seven Masters still pulses, alive, silent, and present, guiding the steps of awakened souls all over the planet. In the common view of reality, constrained by our physical senses and rationalist culture, we believe that only what is visible and measurable exists. However, the great spiritual traditions have always asserted that there are subtle worlds interpenetrating ours, and that in these higher planes of consciousness, beings inhabit who are not limited to the physical body. They are the masters of the order, some incarnated, others not. Some recognized, others operating in anonymity, but all united by a greater purpose, to uphold the light of truth on earth and accompany the birth of a new humanity. These masters do not appear on magazine covers, they do not seek the spotlight, nor do they advertise themselves. They act in silence, often through ordinary people, in simple professions, in discreet meetings. Their greatest works are not in monuments, but in touched hearts, in activated souls, in consciousnesses that remember who they are. They inspire artists, guide scientists, support authentic spiritual leaders, and ignite the fire of the search in every human being who begins to question reality and seek something deeper. The Order of the Seven Masters has never been a closed group. It is vibrational. It is accessible to all who reach a certain level of purity, surrender, and attunement. When a soul achieves a certain degree of alignment with its spark, it naturally resonates with this invisible order. It may not know their names, their symbols, or their structure, but it feels their presence. It dreams of them. It receives powerful intuitions. It feels guided, protected, led by something that transcends the mind, something that, although formless, is absolutely real. There are accounts throughout history of encounters with these masters during critical moments of humanity. When the world seemed on the brink of collapse, enlightened voices would emerge. Krishna, Buddha, Jesus, Francis of Assisi, Rumi, Teresa of Avila, Gandhi, Yogananda, among many others. None of them came out of nowhere. All were touched, inspired, or directly prepared by higher wisdom currents. They all left traces of the touch of the order. And today, it is no different. The world is experiencing a new spiritual birth, and the masters remain present, activating silent warriors of light on all continents. These beings often act through synchronicities, a book that arrives at the right time, a revealing dream, a meeting that transforms life, a phrase that ignites something within you. Do not underestimate these small sparks. They are direct touches from the order. They are forms of subtle contact, adapted to your language and your moment. Because the masters do not only speak with words, they speak with symbols, with frequencies, with silent love. But don't think that their role is merely spiritual or abstract. The order also supports tangible changes in the world. They operate by inspiring new forms of education, energetic healings, conscious technologies, communion with nature, and expansion of planetary consciousness. They are not interested in power but in evolution. They don't accumulate, they share. They don't dominate, they awaken. They are masters because they live wisdom, not because they demand to be followed. And that's why they are so powerful. There are also those who are incarnated, but are not consciously aware that they are part of the order. They are old souls, carrying within them a profound mission, an urgent calling. They feel the need to teach, heal, inspire, build something new, even without fully understanding why. Often they go through challenging, isolated, painful lives. But all of this is part of the polishing process. They are prepared in silence, so that one day they can touch others with the light they already live. These too are masters, in the making. And perhaps if you've made it this far, you're experiencing a similar call, an inner echo, a feeling that there's something you came to do, something the world doesn't yet understand, but that burns in your heart like a silent certainty. This is not an illusion. This is the awakening. And when this call is accepted with truth, the masters approach, not to tell you what to do, but to remind you of who you are, because you already know, you just forgot, and their role is merely to fan the ember that lives in your chest until it becomes fire. There are places on Earth where the presence of the order is more strongly felt: mountains, deserts, ancient monasteries, sacred regions. But do not be mistaken, it also operates in large cities, in urban centers, in the most chaotic corridors. Because light does not flee from shadow. It dives into it to illuminate it from within. The masters do not avoid the world's suffering. They inhabit it with awareness, to rescue there the souls that cry out for meaning, for direction, for truth. This new era, marked by climate transitions, political crises, and social collapses, is also the perfect stage for the visible resurgence of this order, not in the form of a new religion, but of expanded consciousness, of awakened beings living in the world, but no longer bound to it. of men and women who are no longer afraid to be light, nor to confront the darkness with compassion and firmness. The order no longer needs to be hidden, it needs to be embodied in each one who says yes to the call of the soul. And this is where the link with Christ is sealed, because Jesus was the purest expression of this embodied order. He did not come to establish a religion, but to demonstrate what it is like to live as one with the whole. He did not demand belief, he awakened memory. And this is exactly what the Masters continue to do today, awakening in us the living Christ, the Christ beyond the name, the Christ beyond the story, the Christ we are when we cease to be all that we are not. There is a moment in every spiritual quest when the external quiets down. The books, the masters, the temples, all become mirrors pointing to the same destination, the inner self. And in this sacred space where the mind ceases its questions and the soul rests, something begins to emerge. It's not a concept, nor a doctrine. It's a presence, a serene, living, incorruptible light, the Christ spark, the Christ within us. Throughout this entire journey, we have explored the possibility that Jesus did not walk alone, but as part of a sacred lineage, that he was not the only Christ, but the brightest reflection of a universal consciousness accessible to all. Now, this truth reveals itself as a seed within you, because the greatest teaching of the Order of the Seven Masters was never a secret. It was an invitation. Awaken the Christ within you. Become the temple of light yourself. This call is not theoretical, it's visceral. It pulses in quiet moments of clarity, in the tears that appear without apparent reason, in the nights when your spirit cries out for meaning. It's the breath of eternity saying, "You are more than you think you are." And this more is not power, it's not conquest, it's remembrance. Remembrance of your divine origin. Remembrance that what Jesus manifested was not an exception, it was a mirror. When he said, "Be perfect as your heavenly Father is perfect," he was not speaking of morality. He was speaking of essence. He knew that the divine spark resides in every human being, just waiting to be unveiled. When he stated, "You are God's," he was not committing blasphemy. He was revealing a truth forgotten by centuries of blind worship. And when he promised, "I will be with you until the end of time," he was not referring to an absent body, but to an eternal presence that vibrates with every awakening. The Order of the Seven Masters does not seek to create disciples. It seeks to awaken masters. And the first step to this is self-acceptance of one's own spiritual greatness. Not arrogance, but reverence. Recognizing the Christ within oneself is recognizing the mystery of life in its purest form. The union between the human and the divine, the finite and the eternal, the self and the whole. And life, from that point on, ceases to be survival. It becomes conscious manifestation. But this awakening requires courage. Courage to break free from the stupor of the masses. Courage to question inherited beliefs. Courage to feel the pain of transformation. Because awakening the Christ is not just about feeling good. It's about dying to everything that is false. It's about letting everything that does not resonate with truth burn away. It's about allowing the sacred fire to destroy the old self, to reveal the eternal being. As Paul said, "It is no longer I who live, but Christ lives in me." And this Christ does not expect to be worshipped. He expects to be lived. He manifests himself in deep listening, in courageous forgiveness, in love that does not demand a return. He reveals himself when we choose to serve, when we let go of control, when we trust in the intelligence of life. The Christ in us is not an image to follow. It is a consciousness to be embraced. He invites us not to admire him from a distance, but to walk with him, as him, being him. This is the true gospel, not the book, but the good news that resonates in the awakened soul. The revelation that separation was an illusion, that there was never any distance between us and the divine. That ascension is not for after death, It's for now, for every act of compassion, every conscious choice, every breath in presence. Because every moment is a portal, every gesture is an opportunity, every human being is a potential Christ. And that's why the lineage never ends. Each time a being awakens the Christ within themselves, they become a living continuation of the order. Each time someone chooses to love where there was once hatred, to heal where there was once pain, to serve where there was once ego, the order is reborn. Invisible to the eyes, but unbearably real to the heart. The mission continues, and the Christic field expands from the inside out, from one to all, as it was in the beginning, is now, and will be forever. Jesus showed the way. The masters held the light. But now, the torch is in your hands. The world does not need new saviors. It needs awakened souls. It needs men and women who, amidst the chaos, remember their light, who look to the sky not to escape, but to recall where they came from, who walk the earth as living temples, expressing with simplicity the love that has no beginning or end. This is the final call, not to believe, but to live, not to wait, but to be. Christ is not a point in time, he is a state of being. And if you have heard, felt, vibrated with everything that has been revealed so far, know this. You are already on your way. It's no longer about seeking externally. It's about silencing and allowing him to emerge. He, who is you, in your purest, freest, most divine form. And so the promise of the lineage is fulfilled. And thus, Christ returns. Not in clouds, but in consciousness. Not in Jerusalem, but in you. And now, mind unfettered, I want to hear you. Which part of your journey revealed to you that Christ was already dwelling within you? Was it a moment of pain, a dream, a sign, a meeting? Or maybe, this video was your first awakening? Share in the comments with truth and courage.